Hey guys, this is Joe with Homebrew Happy Hour. Today we're going to test out the Anvil Foundry brewing system. This is the 10.5 gallon version. We're going to do a all grain batch on it. We're doing a real simple pale ale, New England style. It's going to be a little hazy. We're trying out a new yeast. So let's check out the system here. We've got the pump for the recirculation of it. So it's going to come out here, up and back to the top. That's for the mashing part, recirculation of the mash. We've got our power screen here, the power button on this side. If you do go to start your system up for your brew day and you have your power flipped on, you're still not getting any power here to your actual display. There is a reset button on the bottom. So make sure you hit that and give it another try, and that should have you covered. Inside, we've also got some gallon markers. We just put our water in and it starts at 5.5 gallons, so we're just under that for the amount of grain that we'll be mashing today. Gives you a little bit of an idea of how much liquid you actually have in the system. Once this heats up to temperature, we have it set at 152 for the mash. We're gonna go ahead and drop our grain basket in, fill up our grain, and then begin our brew process. So once this heats up to temp again, we'll see you guys then, and go ahead and get that grain in there and get to mashing. See you guys soon. So our water has reached strike temperature now. 160 is what we have it set at. When we mix our grain in, it'll drop down to our 152. We're hoping it drops down to around 152 is where we're gonna mash at. So we can start adding the grain. I'll typically add a little bit of grain, stir it in, add a little bit more, stir it in until it's all added in and stirred in real nicely. Then we'll go ahead and put the lid back on, and we're gonna get the recirculation beginning. We mash for 60 minutes, so after we're done stirring in, we'll see you back when the mash is over. We'll stir in some of the grain, give it a little break to kind of stir it in real well. You want to do this to try and prevent the grain from clumping up and creating dough balls, is what we call them. And what that will do is it'll provide you with better efficiency. What those dough balls tend to have is a dry center, so that starch in the middle of those dough balls isn't exposed to the water. And that will, in causation, it'll basically not allow those starches to be converted into simple sugars, is what we want the yeast to eat. So we'll continue to add the rest of these flaked grains in and kind of stir them in as we're going. The consistency most people want to shoot for is a little bit liquidy oatmeal. So you want it to be somewhat thick, but not extremely thick where you're not able to actually stir it. So what I usually tell people, a good rule of thumb, is oatmeal that's a little thicker than you usually eat oatmeal. Alrighty, we're about stirred in. Next thing we'll do is go ahead and put the top on. We're gonna hook up the recirculation kit, get this mash recirculating, and then we'll let it sit for 60 minutes. After that 60 minutes, we'll go ahead and meet you back then, and we'll start the sparging process. Here's the recirculation kit. Let me get this wrapped up around here. This is gonna go up top. This bottom part goes right down here. Let me actually get this cord out of the way. There we go. Alrighty. And the nice thing, this lid is actually pre-drilled, so you can come up through the handle here and actually plug this right into the top. It makes it real nice. I don't know if you necessarily need these clamped. Again, this is our first brew day on it, but just to kind of help hold it down. We'll go ahead and open this valve to prime the pump. All right, as you can see, it's already letting the water, the wort come through here. So we should be good and primed now. We'll go ahead and kick this on. and you can feel it working, and you can kind of see it coming through as well. So now we've got a recirculation going of our mash. We're gonna let this sit for 60-minute mash time, and we'll see you back in about an hour, and we will begin the next step, which would be the sparging process. Our mash is just finishing up inside, and simultaneously we've been heating up some water for the sparge water. So what we're gonna do inside is lift the grain basket up, let that water that's in the bed and in the mash bed and in the grain bed drain out to the kettle itself. Then we're gonna add some more hot water into the top of the mash, and that's gonna kind of rinse out that grain bed and rinse out any sugars that may be left behind in there. And we're gonna basically bump up the efficiency. Again, this is called the sparging process. So we fortunately had an extra cooler, so we're gonna store our hot water in there and then transfer from the cooler to the top of the mash bed. So now we've got our hot liquor tank full of hot water up here. The water is about 170 degrees. That temperature will end the conversion that we've had going on here in our mash. So we're pretty much ready to go here. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off this pump here to stop the recirculation. Remove this arm here. Remove the lid. See, hopefully this isn't too hot, but it is somewhat hot. So we're gonna grab a little hot pad here. This will help us from burning ourselves. Now we're gonna come up with this grain bed, but before I do that, I need to grab the extra little piece that will hold that up. Alrighty, so we'll come up with this. Maybe a good idea to let it drain just a little bit. Will you hold that for a sec, Todd?
I have the whole thing.
All right.
That's pretty short, yeah.
So we're gonna let this drain out first, and then we're gonna, once we hear it kind of slow down to a trickle, we're going to go ahead and open up our sparge water and sparge right in over the top. Again, rinsing out the grain bed and trying to flush as much of the sugar caught in this grain bed down into our kettle for the boil.
How long will you do that for?
The length is not as crucial as making sure you go until you have your boil volume. That's kind of the ultimate goal. You want, this is a 5-gallon batch, so we're gonna shoot for probably 6.5 to 7 gallons total volume to account for the evaporation of the 60-minute boil. We wanna end up around 5 to 5.5 gallons, so we'll shoot for a gallon or two above that. All right, guys, as you can see, we do have our hot liquor tank up here. The last scene, we've got our mash bed up above the kettle, and we have now hooked our tubing up to the hot liquor tank. So we're gonna slowly open this. You don't wanna open it full blast. Just enough to kind of shower head it over to the grain. And again, we're working on trying to flush the sugars that are trapped in here down into our boil kettle, where we're gonna go ahead and boil it for 60 minutes, and soon enough turn it into beer after that. This is our sparge that is still going on here, but we've just hit about 7 gallons, so we're gonna go ahead and kill the sparge here. We're gonna remove the grain basket, and then we're gonna go ahead and adjust our temperature up to about 212 for boiling, and we're gonna set our power output to 100% max so we can try and hit that boil as quick as possible. This batch we're boiling for 60 minutes. So as that 60-minute boil proceeds, that's when we're going to go ahead and add hops throughout that. That's going to depend on what recipe you're brewing. Some hops are going to go in typically at 60 minutes at the very beginning, and then most recipes will have some additions throughout the boil at certain other times. But yours may not necessarily have those additions. Again, it's just going to depend on what kind of recipe you're making. So we're going to go ahead and cut this sparge water off to stop this flow. Remove this tube here. And then one thing you can do is have just an extra bucket handy, and that's a good way to kind of collect so you don't get too much water all over the place. Alrighty, you can probably come and zoom in here. So we're pretty much right at the 7-gallon mark. And down here, we're gonna go ahead and crank our temperature up. We're already at 170. I had it cranked up, but I'm going through it again here so you guys can see. It does go up to 212. And that's the max. If you go up again, it's gonna revert down to the lowest temperature. So 212, we'll let that set. And then on the power function, we've currently got it at 70%. So we're gonna wanna crank that all the way up to 100 to try and again, get this boil going as quickly as possible. And then you let that go, and we'll see you guys in about 60 minutes when we start the cooling process after the boil is complete. Hey guys, this is Joe again, welcome back. So our boil timer just went off. We finished the boil, the 60-minute boil. Let you know, just right offhand, we put this stainless steel immersion chiller in there 15 minutes ago. So about 15 minutes before the boil. So it actually sanitizes with the boil still going. That way we don't have to use any extra sanitizer or anything like that. This particular recipe that we're brewing today actually has a whirlpool or a late addition after the boil. So we're gonna start cooling as we add that last addition. Typically you wanna get it down to about 180, a little bit under. That's where the isomerization stops with hops. So we're gonna start cooling, drop it down to about 180, add those hops, and then continue cooling down to about 80 degrees or under is what I would suggest. If you're anything over 80, you have a chance to kill your yeast. But once we get it under 80 degrees, we're gonna go ahead and transfer it into a bucket like this, pitch our yeast and begin fermenting. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up on kind of what stage we're at now. We're gonna go ahead and hook up a garden hose to this side here. We've got a drain, or we may go into a bucket for the output of this chiller. But it's real simple. You hook up a garden hose to one side, you run cold water through this chiller, and then it outputs, and that's what basically is gonna cool down what we had boiling for this last hour. You really have to have it below a certain degrees, otherwise if you do introduce that yeast, it's just gonna kill it if it's too hot. So again, anything under 80, you shouldn't have too much of an issue with. We'll see you guys here in a bit. So, as you guys remember, we got the chiller in there just a minute ago. We ran cold water through. We got it down below 80 degrees now. So the last step is we basically just have to transfer it into the fermenter, put the yeast in there, cap it off, and let it go to town. That's gonna be pretty much what makes beer, as your yeast combined with your sugar water, and we're gonna show you that now. We typically, with a lot of the systems that I've ran in the past, I usually either use an auto siphon or a pump, some way to transfer it into the fermenter. But a lot of times when you do that, you lose out a little bit on the exposure to oxygen that beer typically never wants. This is basically the only time in the brewing process you actually want to introduce oxygen to your beer, right before you pitch your yeast. Yeast needs a little bit of oxygen to really get going and to do its thing. So what we've decided to do today get this elevated a little bit, and we're gonna just open this valve up wide open into this bucket, and that's gonna kind of stir it around and churn it as it's transferring and really kind of introduce some oxygen. Then we're gonna go ahead and pitch our yeast, close it up, and let it go to town. So let's get started. This really shouldn't be too much for you. You just kind of go ahead and open this up and let it start going to town. As you can see, there's a little bit of hop debris that may be a little bit of some of the grain that may have kind of come through. Don't worry about that too much. When your fermentation actually occurs and progresses, a lot of the sediment and particles that are floating around in that fermentation are gonna, towards the end of it, settle down to the bottom. So again, if you get a little bit of sediment, hop protein, hop residue, protein, any of that stuff, it's not gonna make the world of difference. As you can see, we're getting quite a bit of foam in there. That's good, that's a good sign. Only at this point. Again, guys, do not introduce oxygen to your beer except at this point. We may be able to just go ahead and set this on the ground from here. As long as we're not splashing too much around here, we'll probably be good. So this is our final little process here. We've got our wort transferred into our bucket. We've got our yeast pitched. We've got our lid here on top and our airlock. So basically, we're just ready for it to do the yeast to do its magic in there. It's gonna eat those sugars, turn them into alcohol. It's gonna poop out some CO2 up here. This is gonna let the CO2 out without letting any extra oxygen or any other kind of particles in. And after about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks at the most, for an ale, it's gonna be done. And you're gonna be ready to either go into secondary or you can go straight into the keg from there and have some nice tasting beer. So I hope you guys learned something from this video. And if you have any questions or concerns or anything about your brew day, feel free and welcome to reach out to us at Homebrew Happy Hour. And we will hopefully feature your question or concern on a show or a podcast. If not, we will definitely make sure and get back to you. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video and the Anvil system in whole as a product. We really enjoyed brewing on it today and had a fun time with a couple hiccups here and there. You know, first time on any new system you're gonna run into some hiccups. So again, guys, brewing is not a lockdown method. This is exactly how you have to do it. Everybody has their own little hints and tricks and tips. So take your brew day as it is and enjoy it and make some good tasting beer, guys. Hope y'all have a good one. We'll see you next time.